Hi, fourth grade. I am so grateful to be back working with you. We are going to pick up in math where we last left off before the impromptu break. So let me just give you a couple of reminders about where we were to jog your memory, and then we're going to get started with our new lesson for today. So we last were talking about ordering uh, decimals and mixed numbers. We were talking about how to relate decimals, mixed numbers, fractions, and so we've been talking about tenths and hundredths mostly. We've been also talking about how to relate money to decimals as well. So in this lesson today, we're going to be talking about comparing decimals. So we're going to be using two major skills that we have learned in the past that will really help us today with our lesson. So before I get started with instruction, please make sure that you have your math journal out um, and label it 18.4 compare decimals. Just like in class, we are going to go through, we're going to take notes together. We are going to do practice problems together. I'll model some things for you, and then at the end, I'll release you to do your independent practice. So go ahead and pause this video whenever you need to get caught up, and you can go back and rewatch as many times as you need. Unfortunately, I'm not available live for you to ask me questions in the moment, so I will be setting up a Zoom conference time for your class to be able to log on and ask me questions one-on-one, face-to-face. So I'll be letting your families know when to expect those conferences to come out. It will allow us to video chat with one another, and I can answer your questions face to face through our video cameras. So, um, anyways, if you haven't already, go ahead and get your journal labeled 18.4 compare decimals. Open up those textbooks to page 478 to 479, and as always, please pause the video whenever you need to get caught up. So today we are going to be talking about comparing decimals. To compare means to see if it is greater than, less than, or equal to each other. We primarily compare numbers by looking at the place value of each digit. I'm going to show you a couple of different possibilities today to help you compare. We're going to talk about each one individually. I'll show you how to solve problems using each method. And if you would like to be able to focus on just one, you'll be able to do that later on in the lesson. I do expect you to learn each one of these modes of solving these problems. So first thing I want to show you is called the decimal model. So we're going to take a look at this. It's called the decimal model because it is a picture that is going to help you solve your problem. So let's see here. I was hoping to expand it and it's giving me some trouble. One moment, fourth grade. Thank you for your patience. We're going to get it together. Maybe. Maybe not. Okay, that's okay. We're going to go at it. This is in your textbook. So looking at the decimal model, you can take each decimal and you can model it out using hundreds grids or tenths grids, depending on whether the decimal is in tenths or hundredths. So looking at this first one, we have 1.20. We read this as 1 and 20 hundredths because the last digit we have is in the hundredths place. Right now, you can just be watching the video. You don't need to be writing with me unless you'd like to write the title, which is decimal model. I'm going to take a moment here and calibrate the smartboard. My touch seems to be a little bit off. Forgive me for one moment, fourth grade. Thank you for your patience. We're going to get this together, get it rolling. Okay, let's see if this is better. Okay. There we go. Okay, everything's better now. Thank you for your patience. So, looking at this, These decimal models are broken into hundredths because each of these decimal points go out to the hundredths place. Remember that the first position behind a decimal is called the tenths. The second is called the hundredths. Okay, so looking at these models, we can compare these decimals to see which is larger just by looking to see um, which one has the greater picture. So if we look here, we can tell both of these has one whole. We can see that in the number here, they both have one whole. We can also see that it has 2/10. Two of those full lines are shaded in. We see this also has 2/10, but it also has some additional parts. So we can tell that 1 and 25 hundredths is the greater number. So we would use a greater than sign for that comparison. So that's using decimal models. I'm not going to make you draw those out, but you are going to need to be able to read decimal models. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, this is going to drive me bonkers, and I appreciate your patience as I situate this. Okay, let's see if this one goes a little bit easier. Okay, next one is called number line. So again, you can go ahead and label your journal. Go ahead and label your journal with the label number line. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, kids. Give me one moment while I get back to where I was. Okay, thank you for your patience. So this method is called a number line. We are used to seeing number lines a lot in math. The number line method is to look at a number line normally broken into whatever the range is. This one is to compare those same digits, 1 and 20 tenths and or 20 hundredths and 1 and 25 hundredths. So we break the decimal point number line from one whole all the way up to 1.5 or 1 and 5/10 or 1 and 50 hundredths. So to do this, what you'd have to do is you'd have to map them on both number lines. I'm going to show you how to do this now. We'll practice reading number lines on the next screen. So 1 and 20 hundredths, I can tell that it's beyond 1.0, it's beyond 1.1, it's at 1.2. The reason why 1 and 20 hundredths is equivalent to 1 and 2/10, that's something we learned in our last lesson before school released. The reason that these are equivalent is because, sorry, my dot is not quite on that line. The reason these are equivalent is because we can actually add as many zeros as we want to the back of the last digit of a decimal point, and this does not change the number's actual value. So do you see how in the numbers 1 and 2/10 and 1 and 2 and 20 hundredths, they have a 1 in the ones place, a 2 in the tenths place, and this number has no digits behind it. We can add as many zeros as we want to it, and that number stays the same amount even though it is read differently. So just know, remember that key for you, you can add as many zeros as you wish to the end of the last digit behind a decimal point, and this does not change the number's actual value. So next I have 1 and 25 hundredths. 1 and 25 hundredths. I know that that's beyond 1 and 2/10. It's somewhere between 1 and 3/10. I can tell this 5 tells me that it is 5 tick marks in from 1 and 2/10 because this is 1 and 20 hundredths. So if I counted on 20 hundredths, 21 hundredths, 22 hundredths, 23 hundredths, 24 hundredths, and 25 hundredths, I can then easily see that 1 in 25 hundredths here is greater than 1 and 2/10, just like we saw with the decimal model. So the next skill that we are going to learn is my favorite because it is the most simple and practical. This is what we will be focusing most on moving forward. So that is comparing by place value. So what you need to know when we compare by place value is that you need to remember the place value of each digit. So as a little reminder for you, you should have this in a previous journal from a previous lesson. The first place before the decimal point here is called the ones place. The first digit after the decimal point is called the tenths, and then hundredths. We would continue into the thousandths, would be right there. It is mirrored from what is before the decimal point. We have ones and then we have tens, just like here we have ones, then behind the decimal point we have tenths. So to compare by place value is really quite simple. All we have to do is compare the same place value digit at a time. If they are equal, we'll move on to the next digit. So looking here, I can compare the ones. They are both the same, so I need to move on to the next. I compare the tenths. Those are both the same again, so I need to move on to the hundredths. The hundredths, 9 and 0, this time they are different. That means I can compare. When I arrive at a different value, I can compare. So I see that 2 and 89 hundredths versus 2 and 80 hundredths. I can tell that 2 and 89 hundredths is greater than 2 and 80 hundredths. Now I want you to see here, this 2.8 or 2 and 8 tenths, they added an extra 0 onto the end because of our rule here that we need to remember you can add as many zeros as you wish to the end of the last digit behind the decimal point. It does not change the value. So when you're comparing, if you run out of digits to compare and one of your numbers has more digits, just add zeros on to the end as long as it is the last digit behind a decimal point. Okay, so now that I have modeled for you, I'm going to ask you to pause the video, go through and write out a little bit more quickly these steps. I'll read them to you and maybe suggest some shorter phrases for you. I would like you to pause the video though, write these in your notes so that you have them to come back to. So step 1, start with the greatest place value of a number to compare using place value. To compare both digits in the same place value, you need to start with the greatest place value first. Step 2, if the digits in the same place value are equal, compare the digits in the next greatest place value, just like I showed you on the previous screen. Step 3, if the digits remain equal, continue steps 2 and 3 until you have compared all digits in both numbers or have found one to be greater or less than the other. So go ahead at this time, pause the video, jot those notes down, and then we'll write a sample problem together. Okay, hopefully you have those notes written into your journal. We're going to use this example comparing 1 and 23 hundredths versus 1 and 203 thousandths. Now this is much bigger than what you will have on your problems today by yourself. So one thing that I suggest is you line up the digits by place value. So I have 1 and 23 hundredths and 1 and 203 thousandths. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have these be stacked on top of each other so that I can compare, make sure the digits are lined up. So I'm going to write out really clearly 1 and 23 hundredths. I'm going to then write 1 and 203 thousandths. Now, I can tell already one of my numbers is more digits than the other. So what I'm going to do right away is I'm going to add an extra 0 onto the end. It does not change the value so that these have the same number of digits so I can compare them fairly. Okay, so step 1 tells us to start with the greatest place value. That would be the ones place. So go ahead and underline the ones place. We can see that there's just ones in both of those spots. They're equal. Let's move to the next digit. Next digit is the tenths place. There is a 2 in both of the tenths place spots, so we know that we need to, in step 2, it says if they're the same, compare the next greatest place value. So we keep moving over. we're comparing the hundredths now. I see a 3 in the hundredths place of our first number, a 0 in the hundredths place of the second number. We, according to step 3, have now found two numbers that are not the same, so we can compare. We know that 3 is greater than 0, so that means that 1.230 is greater than 1.203. Let's use proper math language as we write this out. 1 and 23 hundredths is greater than 1 and 203 thousandths. Now looking at this, you might have thought because this first number here had more digits and it looks like, wow, 203, that's a lot. But when we add that other place value 0 at the end, we can see that it is actually less because it's 230,000 versus 203 thousandths. Okay. All right. Let's continue on to some practice looking at a couple different models, number lines, and comparing by place value. So this is coming straight from your textbook. Go ahead and look at number 1. We're going to use these place value models to compare. So number 1, go ahead and write that down in your journal. We have 0.40 or 0 and 40 hundredths compared to 0.4 or 0 and 4 tenths. So we can see both of these decimal models are broken into hundredths. I see that 4 complete rows are shaded in on both numbers. So looking at that decimal model, I can tell that these are equal to each other. All right, number 2. Number 2, I have 1 and 65 hundredths compared to 1 and 56 hundredths. So looking at these, I can see, looking at the decimal models, each of them has one whole. I can see that this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars fully shaded, while this one only has 5 bars fully shaded. So I know right off the bat that 1 and 65 hundredths is greater. Okay, looking at number 3. Number 3 says 2 and 2 tenths compared to 2 and 15 hundredths. So I see that the first model has 2 holes. The second model also has 2 holes. The first model has 2 full bars shaded in. The second model only has 1. So I can tell that 2 and 2 tenths is greater than 2 and 15 hundredths. I also could add a 0 onto the end of this digit, so I'm comparing hundredths to hundredths so that I don't confuse myself. Okay, next, number 4. I see we have 0 and 38 hundredths compared to 1 and 27 hundredths. So looking at the models, I see this has no holes, while I see this has 1 hole. Right off the bat, before even having to compare the decimals, I can see because the second model has 1 hole, it is automatically greater. Okay, we're going to solve a couple of these problems using a number line to see if they are true or false. So let's take a look at number 5. Number 5 says 1 and 7 hundredths is greater than 1 and 70 hundredths. We need to tell whether that is true or false using the number line. So go ahead in your textbook, you have the same number line out in front of you. Go ahead and mark with your fingers to see which one is greater. So I'm going to put a dot where we should be comparing. Go ahead and line up your finger along that number line as well where I put the dot. So I have 1 and 7 hundredths. I know that that's not quite to 1.1. I know it's 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be right here. 1 and 7 hundredths, not quite full to 1.1. Then I have 1 and 70 hundredths. So that means that I have a 7 in the tenths place, so that's going to be all the way down here. So looking at this comparison, is that true? No, it is not true. It is false. Okay, let's solve one more like that. Let's solve together number 7. Okay, number 7 says 1 and 54 hundredths is greater than 1 and 45 hundredths. Is that true? Let's take a look. 1 and 54 hundredths, I see this 5 in the tenths place tells me it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 5 tenths and 1 and 6 tenths. This 4 tells me that it's going to be 4 tick marks between 1 and 5 tenths and 1 and 6 tenths. So I'm going to come over to 1 and 5 tenths. I'm going to move 1, 2, 3, 4 points. That'll put me at 1.54 or 1 and 54 hundredths. Okay, then I see 1.45. I see a 4 in the tenths place. That tells me that this number on the number line will be between 1.4 and 1.5. This 5 tells me it'll be 5 tick marks in between. So I have 1 and 4 tenths, 5 tick marks in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 1.45. Looking at this, I can tell that this is definitely further along from our other point, so this greater than sign makes it true. All right, let's take a look. Oh, before we do that, sorry, friends. We're going to compare a couple more using just comparing by place values. So let's take a look at number 10 and then number 12, and then I'll have you guys start on your own practice work. So number 10, we're going to compare these two. 1.72, is that actually less than 1.27? So 1.72 versus 1.27, like I showed you before, when we're comparing using place value, it really is best to stack them on top of each other by their place value. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite these so that I compare one digit at a time. I like how these are nicely lined up here. Do you see how they all have the same amount of digits? That is really good. It tells me I don't need to add any extra zeros. I'm ready to compare. So let's start with the greatest place value, which is the ones place. They are both the same, so we move to the next greatest place value, which is the tenths. They are different, so I can compare which is greater, 7 or 2. Good. 7 is greater. So I know that 1.72 is greater than 1.27. So this original sign was false. That is not correct. Okay, let's solve one more. We will solve number 12 together and then get you started on your own practice work. So I have 1 and 78 hundredths compared to 1 and 9 hundredths. We're going to see if that is true by comparing using place value. So go ahead and rewrite those, lining them up by their place value. So we start with the greatest place value, which is the ones place. 1 and 1 is the same, so we need to go to the next greatest place value, which is the tenth place. I see that 7 and 0 are different, so I can stop there and compare. 7 is greater than 0, so that means that 1 and 78 hundredths is greater than 1 and 9 hundredths. That means that this original sign was true. All right, you guys, well done. We are through our first digital lesson together. Sorry for the glitches. It will get better and faster as I get used to recording myself on a screen and not having your wonderful faces in the classroom. So now that we're done with the learning, go ahead and complete 18.4 PW from your practice workbook. You're going to do all of the problems. Whatever the method is listed in the directions, I would like you to solve it that way as well as use the place value comparison method in your through your work as well. So we're going to do it by number line and place value model. If it ever doesn't have that already provided for you, you can go ahead and just use comparison by place value. You don't need to do drawings out today, but if there's a number line on your work page, I want you to solve those problems using that. If there is a place value um, models, I want you to use those decimal models if they're drawn out for you. Okay, so good luck on your daily work. I will see you tomorrow for 18.5. Just like today, we'll go over a lesson together, take notes in our journals, and then do an independent assignment. So I look forward to chatting with you all tomorrow.